The man stepped out of his car and took a deep breath. He had just returned from a long international trip, and all he wanted was some rest in a quiet, comfortable place. The hotel he chose wasn't just any hotel. It was one of the properties he owned. But no one knew that yet. Dressed casually in a simple hoodie and jeans, he grabbed his wallet and phone, deciding to go inside without any luggage. This was part of his routine. He liked to check on his hotels as an ordinary guest to see how things were really running. As he entered the grand lobby, he couldn't help but admire the space. The shiny marble floors reflected the light from the crystal chandeliers hanging above. It was elegant, luxurious, and exactly what you'd expect from a high-end boutique hotel. But something about the atmosphere changed when he approached the reception desk. Sitting behind the counter was a middle-aged woman with her hair tied back tightly. She glanced up at him briefly before returning to her computer screen, her expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" she asked in a flat tone, not bothering to look up again. "Yes," he replied politely, giving her a small smile. "I'd like to check in." At this, she finally raised her head, her eyes scanning him from top to bottom. His casual clothes seemed to catch her attention more than anything else. Her lips curled into a slight smirk, and there was a flicker of judgment in her gaze. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked sharply, almost as if she already knew the answer. He nodded calmly, unfazed by her attitude. "It's under my last name." She typed something into her computer, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the keyboard. For a moment, her face softened slightly when she saw the name pop up on the screen. But then, almost immediately, her guard went back up. "Oh," she said, leaning back in her chair. "This is a very exclusive hotel. Are you sure you can afford it?" Her words hit hard, though he didn't let it show. A few nearby guests turned their heads subtly, sensing the tension in the air. Some looked away awkwardly, while others pretended not to notice. He stood there quietly for a second, taking in the weight of her comment. It wasn't the first time someone had treated him this way because of the color of his skin. Still, it never got easier to hear. "I think I'll manage," he said evenly, handing over his ID and credit card. His voice carried no hint of anger or frustration, just calm determination. As she processed his information, her movements were slow and deliberate, as though she was trying to make the process as uncomfortable as possible. When she finally handed him the keycard, she avoided making eye contact entirely. "Oh, and one more thing," she added under her breath, loud enough for him to hear but soft enough that others might miss it. "Some people really shouldn't even try to come here." For a split second, he considered saying something. Maybe he should call her out right then and there. After all, he could easily reveal who he was and watch her squirm. But instead, he chose to remain silent. There was a bigger lesson to be taught here, one that would leave a lasting impression not only on her but on everyone involved. With the keycard in hand, he turned and walked toward the elevators, feeling the weight of her words lingering behind him. Despite the insult, he couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about proving a point. And as the elevator doors closed, sealing him off from the lobby, he allowed himself a small, knowing smile. Tomorrow everything would change, for her, for the hotel, and maybe even for himself. The man sat in his hotel suite, staring out the large window at the city skyline. The room was luxurious, soft lighting, plush furniture, and a view that stretched for miles. But he couldn't enjoy it fully. His mind kept replaying the receptionist's words from earlier. "Some people really shouldn't even try to come here." Those words echoed in his head not because they hurt, but because they revealed something deeper, a flaw in the system, a mindset that needed to be challenged. He sighed and leaned back on the couch, letting his thoughts wander. He had always believed in leading by example. As someone who had worked hard to build his business empire, he knew the value of earning respect. But respect wasn't something you could demand. It had to be given freely. And sometimes people needed a wake-up call to understand why it mattered. Picking up his phone, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. It rang twice before a voice answered on the other end. "Hello?" "Hey, it's me," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I need you to get the hotel manager on the line as soon as possible." There was a pause on the other end. "Is everything okay?" the assistant asked cautiously. "Not exactly," he replied. "But I'll explain when we're all together. Just make it happen." Within minutes, he was connected to the general manager of the hotel. The man on the other end sounded cheerful, clearly unaware of what was coming next. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to our property. How can I assist you?" The guest took a deep breath before responding. "Thank you for taking my call. I'm currently staying in room 1408. Unfortunately, I ran into some issues during check-in. I'd like to discuss them with you tomorrow morning, if that works for you." The manager hesitated for a moment, sensing that this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. "Of course, sir, we take guest feedback very seriously. What time would you like to meet?" 9 o'clock sharp, came the reply. "And trust me, this is something you'll want to hear in person." When the call ended, the man felt a mix of emotions: anger, determination, and even a little excitement. He knew that what he was about to do wouldn't just affect the receptionist, it would ripple through the entire hotel staff. People would talk about this for weeks, maybe even months, but more importantly, it would send a message, one that couldn't be ignored. The next morning he woke up early, dressed carefully, and made sure every detail was perfect. Gone was the hoodie and jeans from the day before. Instead, he wore a tailored suit that exuded confidence and authority. When he stepped into the lobby, heads turned. Even the receptionist, who was now working a different shift, looked up briefly before quickly averting her gaze. If she recognized him, she didn't say anything. At exactly 9 o'clock, he knocked on the door of the manager's office. Inside, the manager stood up immediately, extending his hand with a nervous smile. "Good morning, sir. Please have a seat." The guest shook his hand firmly, then sat down across from him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The manager fidgeted slightly, unsure of how to break the ice. Finally, the guest leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I own this hotel," he said plainly, watching the manager's face change color almost instantly. The man blinked rapidly, clearly caught off guard. Before he could respond, the guest continued. "Yesterday, your receptionist treated me with such disrespect that I'm seriously considering shutting this place down entirely." The manager's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Sir, I had no idea. I assure you, this isn't the standard we aim for." "It happened right in front of your lobby," the guest interrupted, his voice steady but firm. "She judged me based on how I looked. She assumed I didn't belong here because of the color of my skin and my clothes. She humiliated me in front of other guests, and frankly, I'm not okay with that." The manager sank into his chair, his shoulders slumping under the weight of the accusation. "I'll speak to her immediately," he stammered. "This kind of behavior won't be tolerated. I promise you, sir, we'll fix this." But the guest wasn't satisfied yet. He leaned back in his chair, studying the manager's reaction carefully. "Fixing it isn't enough," he said after a moment. "You see, firing her might solve the immediate problem, but it doesn't address the root cause. Discrimination. Like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's part of a larger issue, a culture that allows it to exist in the first place." The manager nodded slowly, realizing the gravity of the situation. "What do you suggest, sir?" The guest smiled faintly, a glimmer of determination in his eyes. "Let's set up a test," he said. "Something that will show us just how widespread this attitude is among your staff. If we're going to fix this, we need to know the truth." The manager hesitated, clearly uneasy about where this was heading. But he also knew there was no backing out now. "All right," he said, finally. "Whatever you need, we'll do it." The plan was simple, yet it carried a lot of weight. The guest knew that exposing the truth wasn't just about catching one person in the act. It was about uncovering a pattern, a culture that allowed discrimination to thrive unnoticed. He wanted to see how far this behavior went, whether it was an isolated incident or something deeper rooted within the hotel's operations. Early the next morning, everything was set in motion. Two actors were brought in for the task, one white and dressed sharply in a suit, the other black and wearing casual clothes, much like the guest had been during his own check-in. Both were given clear instructions. Approach the reception desk, separately ask for a room without a reservation, and observe how they were treated. Hidden cameras were discreetly installed around the lobby to capture every interaction. When the first actor walked in, a tall, confident man in a crisp suit, the receptionist greeted him warmly. Her smile was wide, her tone friendly. "Good morning. How may I assist you today?" she asked, leaning slightly forward with genuine interest. "I'd like to book a room," he replied casually. "Do you have anything available?" She quickly scanned her computer, nodding enthusiastically. "Absolutely, we actually have a few premium rooms open. Would you like me to upgrade you to a suite? It's on special offer today." The actor played along, pretending to consider the offer. "That sounds great, let's do it." As she processed his request, she chatted politely, asking if he needed help with luggage or recommendations for restaurants nearby. By the time he walked away with his key card, he had been offered complimentary breakfast, a late checkout, and even a free drink at the hotel bar. Minutes later, the second actor entered the lobby. Dressed in jeans and a plain t-shirt, he approached. The same receptionist. His demeanor was calm and respectful as he spoke. "Hi, I'm looking for a room. Do you have any availability?" The receptionist's expression shifted almost instantly. Her warm smile faded, replaced by a look of indifference. She glanced at her screen briefly before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, we're fully booked today." The actor raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "Really? That's strange. I thought I saw someone else checking in just now." Her tone grew colder. "Well, they must have had a reservation. We don't accommodate walk-ins unless there's space, and right now there isn't any." He pressed further, sensing her discomfort. "Are you sure? Maybe there's a cancellation or something?" She sighed audibly, clearly annoyed. "Look, I already told you, we're full. You'll have to try somewhere else." With that, she turned her attention back to her computer, effectively dismissing him. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 minutes, but it spoke volumes. The hidden cameras captured every detail. The stark contrast between the treatment of the two men, the subtle cues in body language, and the blatant disregard for fairness. When the footage was reviewed later, it left no room for doubt. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a reflection of bias embedded in the system. Later, that afternoon, the guest met with the hotel manager again. This time, the atmosphere in the office was tense. The manager sat behind his desk, fidgeting nervously as the guest placed a USB drive on the table. "This is what happened today," he said simply. "Take a look." The manager hesitated for a moment before inserting the drive into his laptop. As he watched the video playback, his face grew pale. The evidence was undeniable. His staff had treated two guests completely differently based solely on their appearance. When the clip ended, he sat silently, staring at the screen in disbelief. This can't be happening," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "How could we let this happen under our roof?" "It's not just about letting it happen," the guest replied firmly. "It's about allowing a culture where this kind of behavior feels acceptable. Your employees didn't think twice about discriminating because they assumed no one would hold them accountable. And honestly, who could blame them? If leadership doesn't prioritize equality, why should they?" The manager nodded slowly, guilt etched across his features. "You're absolutely right. I've failed as a leader, but I swear, this ends now. What do you want me to do?" The guest leaned forward, his voice steady but resolute. "First, the receptionist involved needs to go, immediately. Second, your entire staff requires mandatory diversity training. Not just a quick seminar, but real, meaningful education on inclusivity. Third, I want strict policies put in place to ensure this never happens again. Any employee caught engaging in discriminatory behavior will face immediate consequences." The manager agreed without hesitation. "Consider it done. I'll handle everything personally." But the guest wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," he added. I want to address the staff myself. Tomorrow morning, gather everyone in the conference room. They need to hear directly from me why this matters." The next morning, the hotel buzzed with an unusual energy. Staff members milled about, exchanging whispers and glances as they made their way to the conference room. Word had spread quickly that there would be an emergency meeting, a rare occurrence in itself, but no one knew exactly why it was happening. Some speculated it was about budget cuts or new company policies, while others feared layoffs were on the horizon. The air was thick with tension, anticipation, and a hint of unease. When the guest entered the room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he carried himself with quiet authority. Every eye turned toward him as he stepped up to the front of the room, his presence commanding silence without saying a word. The manager stood beside him, looking, visibly nervous, clutching a folder tightly in his hands. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Good morning, everyone," the manager began, his voice shaky but audible. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We have important matters to discuss today. Please welcome." Before he could finish, the guest raised a hand gently, signaling him to stop. "Let me take it from here," he said smoothly, his tone calm yet firm. Turning to face the room, he scanned the crowd of faces, some curious, some anxious, and a few defiant. He took a deep breath, then began. "I own this hotel," he stated plainly, letting the weight of his words sink in. A collective gasp rippled through the room. People exchanged shocked looks, murmuring softly to each other. No one had expected this revelation. Most assumed he was just another corporate representative sent to deliver bad news, but now they realized they were sitting across from the person who held ultimate power over their workplace, and possibly their jobs. "Yesterday," he continued, raising his voice slightly to regain their attention, "I checked into this hotel as a guest. I arrived casually dressed, without luggage, and approached your reception desk. What happened next was enlightening." He paused, locking eyes with a few individuals in the front row. "Your colleague treated me with blatant disrespect. She judged me based on my appearance, on the color of my skin, and the clothes I wore. She questioned whether I belonged here, suggested I couldn't afford to stay, and even muttered under her breath that some people shouldn't try to come here." A hush fell over the room. Some employees looked down at their laps, ashamed, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman near the back crossed her arms defensively, her expression unreadable. The guest let the silence linger for a moment, allowing his words to resonate. "But I didn't stop there," he went on. "To understand how widespread this attitude might be, I conducted a test yesterday, with the help of 2 actors. He gestured to the manager, who dimly lit a projector screen behind them. On it appeared footage of the white actor being warmly greeted and offered upgrades, followed by the black actor being dismissed coldly, despite identical requests. As the video played, the room grew quieter still. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, but nothing else. When the clip ended, the guest clicked off the projector and turned back to the staff. "This is what discrimination looks like," he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "It's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's subtle, hidden, behind smiles or excuses. But make no mistake, it's still discrimination, and it has no place here." He let his gaze sweep across the room once more, making sure everyone felt seen. "Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to shame anyone. Mistakes happen, we're all human. But ignoring those mistakes, allowing them to fester, that's where the real problem lies. If we don't address these issues head-on, they'll only get worse." By now, several employees looked genuinely remorseful, nodding along as he spoke. Others seemed conflicted, unsure of how to process what they'd just witnessed. The guest softened his tone slightly, leaning forward slightly to bridge the gap between himself and the audience. "I built this hotel because I believe in creating spaces where everyone feels welcome," he explained. "Not just wealthy guests, not just people who look a certain way, but everyone. Because hospitality isn't just about providing luxury, it's about treating people with dignity and respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from." He straightened up, his voice growing firmer again. Moving forward, things are going to change. Your manager has already begun implementing new policies, including mandatory diversity training for every single employee. Anyone caught engaging in discriminatory behavior will face immediate consequences, including termination. This isn't up for debate. For a moment he paused, letting his words hang in the air. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "If any of you feel uncomfortable working in an environment that prioritizes equality and fairness, now is the time to leave. Because this hotel will no longer tolerate anything less." No one moved. The room remained silent, save for the occasional shuffle of feet or creak of a chair. It was clear that his message had landed, hard. Some employees exchanged guilty glances, while others sat stiffly, processing the gravity of the situation. Finally, the guest concluded with a simple statement. "This hotel belongs to me, but it exists for our guests. Let's make sure it's a place they'll remember, not for how they were judged, but for how they were treated." With that, he nodded to the manager, signaling the end of the meeting. As the staff filed out of the room, the mood was somber, but reflective. For many, it was a wake-up call, a reminder that their actions mattered more than they realized. And for the guest, it was the first step toward building something better. In the days following the meeting, the hotel underwent a transformation. It wasn't just about new policies or training programs, it was a shift in mindset, a collective effort to rebuild trust and redefine what hospitality truly meant. The guest who owned the hotel stayed involved every step of the way, ensuring that his message didn't fade into background noise. He knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but he was determined to see it through. The first major step was addressing the staff directly. After the initial shock of the meeting wore off, many employees began to open up, some willingly, others reluctantly. They shared their thoughts during small group discussions, led by professional trainers brought in specifically for diversity workshops. These weren't your typical corporate seminars where people nodded politely and forgot everything afterward. These sessions were raw, honest, and at times uncomfortable. Employees were encouraged to speak freely about their biases, fears, and misconceptions. One housekeeping attendant, a middle-aged woman with years of experience, admitted she had once avoided interacting with certain guests because of stereotypes she'd picked up over the years. "I never thought I was doing anything wrong," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "But now I realize how unfair that must have felt to them." Another employee, a young man working as a bellhop, spoke about feeling overlooked himself when he first started because of his age and casual appearance. "If I've been on the receiving end of judgment, why did I think it was okay to judge others?" he asked aloud, his words resonating with several colleagues. These conversations weren't easy, but they were necessary. Slowly, walls began to come down. People started seeing each other and their guests, not as labels or assumptions, but as individuals deserving of respect. The trainers emphasized practical steps too: how to greet someone warmly regardless of their appearance, how to handle difficult situations without letting personal biases interfere, and most importantly, how to recognize unconscious prejudice and actively work against it. Meanwhile, the receptionist involved in the incident, the one who had dismissed the owner so rudely, was formally terminated. Her departure sent a clear message throughout the hotel. No one was above accountability. While some staff members felt sympathy for her, knowing she likely acted out of ignorance rather than malice, they also understood why her behavior couldn't be tolerated. A few even approached the manager privately to express gratitude for taking such decisive action. "It needed to happen," one front desk clerk said quietly. "Otherwise, nothing would have changed." As weeks passed, tangible improvements became noticeable not only among the staff but also among guests. Word spread quickly about the hotel's renewed commitment to inclusivity. Social media posts praised its warm atmosphere, with visitors sharing stories of exceptional service and genuine kindness. One review stood out in particular. "From the moment I walked in, I felt welcomed, not judged." That's rare these days, and it made all the difference. Behind the scenes, the owner continued to monitor progress closely. He visited the hotel regularly, blending in with guests to observe interactions firsthand. During one visit, he noticed a young family checking in, parents with two energetic kids clearly exhausted from travel. The receptionist greeted them warmly, offering a complimentary upgrade to a family suite. Later, while having coffee in the lounge, he overheard a couple chatting about how impressed they were with the attention to detail. "Even the valet guy remembered my name," the husband said with a laugh. "That doesn't usually happen." Moments like these reassured him that his efforts were paying off. But he didn't rest on his laurels. Change required constant vigilance, and he knew complacency could undo everything they'd worked for, so he implemented regular feedback loops, encouraging both guests and employees to share concerns or suggestions anonymously. This created an ongoing dialogue, ensuring that issues could be addressed before they escalated. There were still challenges, of course. Some employees struggled to adapt, clinging to old habits despite the training. Others resented the increased scrutiny, grumbling under their breath about political correctness or overkill. But the majority embraced the changes wholeheartedly, recognizing the value of treating everyone equally. Over time, those resistant voices grew quieter, drowned out by the growing chorus of positivity. One evening, the owner found himself sitting alone in the hotel's rooftop garden, watching the city lights flicker below. It had been a long journey, filled with frustration, tension, and hard truths. Yet, as he reflected on everything that had transpired, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He hadn't just fixed a problem. He had sparked a movement, a ripple effect that extended far beyond the walls of this single hotel. He thought back to the day he'd arrived incognito, humiliated by someone who didn't know who he was. At the time, it had stung, not because of the insult itself, but because it revealed a flaw in the system he'd built. Now, standing tall as a leader, he realized something important. True strength wasn't about wielding power over others. It was about using that power to uplift, inspire, and create lasting change. With a small smile, he rose from his seat and headed back inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow. But for now, he allowed himself to feel proud, not just of what he'd accomplished, but of the team around him who had risen to meet the moment. Together, they had turned a place of exclusion into a beacon of hope, and that, he decided, was worth every ounce of effort. Months had passed since the incident that shook the hotel to its core. The changes weren't just surface level anymore, they had taken root, growing into something real and meaningful. Guests noticed it in the way staff greeted them with genuine smiles, remembered their preferences, and went out of their way to make their stay special. Employees felt it too, a renewed sense of pride in their work, knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves. The hotel wasn't just a building filled with luxury amenities. It had become a place where people felt seen, valued, and respected. The owner returned frequently, not always to check on progress, but sometimes simply to experience the transformation firsthand. On one such visit, he walked through the lobby during the early morning rush. Business travelers hurried past with suitcases, families gathered around the concierge desk planning their day, and a group of tourists laughed as they waited for their taxi. The energy was vibrant, alive, and unmistakably warm. He paused near the reception area, watching quietly as a young black man approached the front desk. Dressed casually in sneakers and a hoodie, the guest looked hesitant, almost unsure if he belonged in such an upscale setting. The receptionist, a new hire who had joined after the shakeup, greeted him warmly. "Good morning. How can I assist you today?" The guest relaxed visibly, his shoulders dropping as he replied, "Hi, I'm checking in. It's under my last name." "Of course," she said with a friendly smile, typing quickly on her computer. "Ah, yes, here we are. You're all set. Would you like me to arrange for someone to help you with your bags?" "No, thanks," he replied, shaking his head. "I've only got this." He gestured to a small backpack slung over his shoulder. "Well, let us know if you need anything at all," she said, handing him his keycard. "We're here to make sure you have a great stay." As the guest turned away, the owner couldn't help but smile. That moment, simple yet profound, was proof that things had changed. It wasn't about perfection. No system could ever be completely free of flaws. But it was about effort, intention, and a commitment to doing better every single day. Later that evening, he attended a small gathering hosted by the hotel staff to celebrate their recent achievements. Guest satisfaction scores had skyrocketed, online reviews glowed with praise, and bookings were up significantly compared to previous months. More importantly, though, morale among employees was higher than ever. They felt empowered, not just to perform their jobs well, but to create meaningful connections with those they served. Standing at the front of the room, the owner raised a glass to toast the team. "When I first came here," he began, his voice steady but heartfelt, "I didn't expect to find what I did, and honestly it hurt. Not because of how I was treated personally, but because it showed me that we weren't living up to our potential. This hotel is supposed to represent excellence, inclusivity, and care. For a while, we lost sight of that." He paused, looking around the room at the faces staring back at him. Some wore expressions of pride, others of quiet reflection. "But look at us now," he continued. "You've worked hard to turn things around. Every one of you has played a role in making this place what it is today. A home away from home. For anyone who walks through our doors, that's something worth celebrating." Applause erupted, filling the room with warmth and camaraderie. A few employees even wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the journey they'd been on together. One housekeeper stood up to speak, her hands trembling slightly as she held the microphone. "Before all this happened, I used to think my job was just cleaning rooms," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "But now I see it differently. I'm not just tidying up, I'm creating comfort for someone who might be far from home, maybe even feeling lonely. Knowing that makes me want to do my best every day." Her words struck a chord, prompting nods and murmurs of agreement throughout the room. Another employee, a bartender known for his quick wit and charm, chimed in next. "I've always loved talking to guests, hearing their stories," he said with a grin. "But now I feel like I'm actually listening to them instead of just hearing. It's made a huge difference for me and for them." By the time the evening wound down, there was a palpable sense of unity among the staff. They weren't just co-workers anymore. They were teammates working toward a shared goal. As the owner left the party, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for himself, but for the incredible group of people he'd helped guide toward change. Weeks later, he found himself back in the rooftop garden, sipping coffee as the sun dipped below the horizon. The city lights twinkled like stars, casting a soft glow over the bustling streets below. He thought about everything that had transpired, the challenges, the resistance, the breakthroughs, and realized how much he'd learned along the way. This experience hadn't just changed the hotel, it had changed him too. Before, he'd focused primarily on numbers, profits, occupancy rates, revenue streams. Now he understood that success wasn't measured solely by financial metrics. True success came from impact, from knowing that his actions, decisions, and leadership had made a difference in people's lives. He also knew the work wasn't done. Discrimination, bias, and inequality weren't problems confined to one hotel or one industry. They existed everywhere, often hidden beneath layers of tradition, fear, or apathy. But tackling those issues required courage. The courage to confront uncomfortable truths, to hold oneself accountable, and to lead by example. As he sat there, reflecting on the road ahead, he felt a renewed determination. His mission extended beyond this property. He envisioned expanding these principles to other hotels, businesses, and communities. If one man's decision to challenge the status quo could transform a single establishment, imagine what collective action could achieve. For now, though, he allowed himself to savor the moment. The hum of the city faded into the background as he closed his eyes, letting the cool night breeze wash over him. In that quiet space, he felt at peace, grateful for the lessons learned, proud of the progress made, and hopeful for the future. Change, he realized, started with a single step. And sometimes that step was as simple as walking through a door, ready to face whatever lay ahead.